if you want to make sure that someone does something, then the best thing you can do is to tell them they're not allowed to do it. It's forbidden. It immediately makes people want to do something. This is a weird thing. And so why does Christianity oppose sex if the opposition of something like premarital sex makes people want it that much more? It's a situation where Alan Watts called Christianity a sexual restraint society that was so concerned with sexual behavior that was elevated above many things that maybe probably should be, arguably are more important. So why does this happen? So even within Christianity, we hear this all the way back in Scripture. And so Paul's letter to the Romans, so this is chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. He says, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. So prohibitions actually water the desires. They actually make desires worse. And so if you're concerned about someone having a desire that's a problem, telling them that they can't do it can actually make the situation significantly worse. Now, why does this happen? And why has Christianity become so concerned with sex in particular? Because there are lots of different forms of that kind of desire. I mean, gluttony, right? That's certainly lust for food. That's also a problem, maybe even more problematic in the sense that it, also destroys your health. So why sex? Why did sex get picked on? Well, I have an idea for this. It may be the case that Christianity opposed sex and sex became a big target because sex is the strongest desire that we have that we can consistently deny without killing us. It's the strongest desire that we have that if you deny it, you don't die. And you don't ever die from it. It never kills you. It might feel like it, but it never actually kills you. If you fast for long enough, I've got bad news for you, right? If you don't breathe, if you don't sleep, if you don't any given thing, all of the other desires that we have, arguably, if you deny those to yourself, then there's a serious physical risk of you just not making it. But with sex, it's just emotional pain. It's not something that you're actually physically going to die from. And so that may be what's really going on. Now, if that's the case, that points to a darker reality. And that darker reality may be that, well, all of the 10 commandments, all of the 7 deadly sins are sins of desire. And so Christianity opposes not sex specifically necessarily, but desire. And so what is quintessentially human in our desires? So any kind of selfish desire, and this it has in common with Buddhism in that way, but nevertheless. But there's a departure there because in Buddhism, it is a tool. It is an instrument to get you from one place to another. It's the raft that takes you across the sea from one island to the next. It's not the other island itself. Whereas in Christianity, oftentimes what we hear is this, talk of fire and brimstone preaching against sex as if it was the end in itself. And obviously that's a problem, right? Because mistaking the tool for the end, mistaking the map for the landscape, that kind of thing is problematic. So why is it that prohibition actually makes desire worse? Well, there's, as it turns out, I think a good evolutionary argument for why this should be the case. It's not rules in general. If I tell you that, that cliff over there is really high, and if you go run and jump off of it, you're going to die, that we're not inclined as people to just all of a sudden become lemmings and, run for the edge of the cliff and say, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to show you. That just doesn't happen, right? Except in extremely rare cases, but we won't go there. So we're not lemmings. We don't have to worry about that. And if somebody tells you that, you can't go outside without getting wet because it's raining, then we don't curse the sky and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to show you. We don't do that with rules. We don't do it with gravity. We don't do it with things that we absolutely have no control over that have nothing to do with people. But for the things that do have something to do with people and are tied to culture, our natural reaction tends to be, okay, you said that's a rule. Yeah, let's see if I can't overturn that. Let's see if I can't push against it. And let's see if I can establish my own rules. In other words, it's more of a pack alpha sort of mentality where you have a king, you have an alpha, that decides the rules for the rest of the pack. But people are naturally inclined to push back against that, such that if it's possible for them to overcome the alpha by strength, then you become the new alpha. Might makes right, you become the new king and you get to set the rules. And then everybody will be bitter against your rules until such time as you're overthrown, and it just kind of keeps going. And so that's the kind of thing that we see, ironically, in some rituals in human society with, for instance, the regifugium. The regifugium was a ritual in ancient Rome, and even at that time when we hear people talking about it, they didn't know what it meant. It was the running of the king, regifugium, literally flight of the king. And so the king would run a race, and presumably the winner of the race would become the new king. Well, I mean, this used to be a higher stakes game, presumably, and this is what we know now, looking back historically, is that this was in the past probably a much higher stakes game where the king was literally running for his life. And if you didn't make it and you didn't win the contest, then, well, that's it for the king. Which is what we get, by the way, with a lot of different societies where the king is always in a precarious position. They're always, their life is threatened. If indeed their vitality, if their strength ever wanes, then they are replaced by another king. And that is simply a human form of the same kind of stuff that lions and wolves and whatnot do in having an alpha. And then occasionally there's a change of the guard and there's a new alpha. So there's that. But we're in a particularly interesting situation right now, and arguably in the last at least couple of hundred years with this, since around 1800-ish, Nietzsche really recognized this. But this is something that has become more of a problem in the sense that when I hear someone else tell me, especially in the guise of religion, oh, no, you're not allowed to do that. That makes God angry or something of the kind. Our natural reaction is to say that is an external thing. That is one of your rules, but everybody has their own ways of living. Don't tread on me, I won't tread on you, sort of thing. That's fine. You do whatever you want, but don't try and force it on me. And it's not just a matter of rugged individualism. It's a matter of our sense of the individual has come to include all of what it is that previously was included with religion. And so the individual was previously subservient to religion. Now the individual includes potentially a conception of divinity, a conception of heaven and hell and religion in general, which is, by the way, what we start getting at the beginning of the modern age with Giordano Bruno. And so I've addressed this elsewhere, and I would encourage you to check out the talk on that for more detail about Bruno and what it is that's specifically going on there. But suffice to say, if it's another human's rule, and it's another human's religion, then we're like, okay, that's just, that's your religion. It's not mine. That's your life. It's not mine. And it's not the kind of thing that we find ourselves as compelled as we might have been in the past to recognize the alpha and recognize the authority and then put ourselves under the authority. Now, when it's put that way, I think it's a little bit easier to understand historically, because most people now look at the medieval conception of auctoritas. Auctoritas was authority. Authority was that which should not go questioned. And we look at that as one of the hallmarks of the small-mindedness of the medieval world that we got beyond, so goes the hero story, of modernity, where we got beyond the small-mindedness of auctoritas, of authority, and then went to everyone deciding for themselves, show me the evidence, let's do science and find knowledge. Well, the religious version of that is that we're not just willing to submit to authority anymore. So this has nothing to do with science. It's just a part of the worldview right now that people have grown in a direction where the individual is no longer such that we feel comfortable putting the individual beneath another person, another authority, another king, another whatever. In some ways, we have grown against and now have become like all pack alphas or something of the kind. It's a very strange situation that's largely unprecedented in history, which is why Nietzsche argued that God is dead. Because all previous conceptions of God then are unbelievable to us. They're not the kind of thing that your modern person can take in, internalize. It's not the kind of thing that resonates with us. It's not the kind of thing that we find beautiful, like a beautiful piece of music. We now have looked back on all previous forms of music in this way and said, it doesn't sound good anymore. That's not the kind of stuff that we want. We want a different kind of tune. And so I think that's what's happened here. So arguably, Christianity and institutionalized religion in general is going to have a tough time trying to survive in this environment by insisting upon authority and insisting upon other people's rules, so to speak, other people's religion. And if indeed what is emphasized is a blind adherence to either rules or faith, in other words, dogma or ethics, then I think it's going to be a very hard sell, and increasingly people are just not buying it. And this is why we see people moving away from religion and not having a good alternative, because all of them try to maintain some kind of homogeneity, some kind of coherence, some kind of solidarity with respect to the in-group and the out-group, something to identify that group as Christian, as whatever the religion might happen to be. If you lack that kind of very easy sort of quasi-objective characteristic, then it's hard for an institution to hold together. But at the same time now, it's being eaten from the inside because individuals, as individuals, including religion, are no longer accepting of, they're no longer internalizing, it doesn't work for them with other people's religion. And so I'm not sure that I see a path forward that doesn't identify something like these rules and dogmas and all of this sort of thing as tools, as instruments, as things that can help. But if it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If you don't like this piece of music, if you don't like this artist, find another one. Find something that works for you so that you can still have a good time at the concert or the art museum or just in general with aesthetics in life. Because ultimately, as I've argued elsewhere, religion has more in common with aesthetics than it does with logic. And so if religion is itself a kind of aesthetic phenomenon, it is itself dependent upon a kind of beauty, then it makes sense that it should go in the way of beauty. With respect to beauty is not the kind of thing that you argue for. It's not the kind of thing that results in solid rules. It's not the kind of thing that results in authority. And so as those elements are being swept out of religion, but people are not leaving the beauty of it, because we still make movies. Even avowed atheists enjoyed things like The Exorcist, and, they enjoy that kind of Christian iconography. They just don't necessarily want the, sex is bad and you can't do this and you can't do that. It would be a little different, I think, if they were seen as instruments, as tools, which is possible. It's just not frequently the version that we get, which is why we see this significant departure. So I hope this was interesting, and I hope it was good to think with. Let me know what you think.